Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Francis Davis. This is for the Paul Revere contest at Infowars.com. Thank you, Alex Jones, for this opportunity. What I'm about to present to you is a book that I've been working on for about 4 years now. I actually recently finished it in light of my opportunity to enter this contest, so I'm going to go ahead and read it aloud for you. I hope you enjoy it. It's called What If You Saw the Truth? I think, therefore I am. I am free to speak, I am free to think for myself, and my will, not yours, shall be carried out by me. Those were the last words John spoke to the Supreme Court before they cut out his tongue and had him crucified for all to see. At the time, I didn't even know what he meant. In fact, I'd never heard the words I or me prior to that day, and I had certainly never met a man with a name of his own rather than a number. I've spent several years trying to figure out what he meant, and I believe I've grasped it recently. Welcome to America 2100. In our society, we are to carry out the will of the court, for its will is the greater good, to serve the many, us. From birth until your 18th birthday, you were taught in school how to serve your brethren and your country for the greater good. On your 18th birthday, you are granted your career by the Supreme Court. This is signified by a small microchip placed beneath the skin of the forearm, hand, or head. On this chip is all of your personal information, which is entered into a massive government computer system. The citizens of this government are completely unaware of this. I was sanitation worker 746-32420. At least I was until I saw the truth. In my society, you mate with a new woman each year, designated to you by the court in the spring, and we find this to be shameful. Before reading the manuscripts left behind by John, I'd never heard the words God, I, me, myself, science, love, joy, or sorrow, but he opened my eyes to the truth. In my society, only those designated to be scholars by the court are granted access to books. The only books they are given are chosen by the court. From your 18th birthday on, you carry out your career to fulfill your duty to America, and no other task may you strive for. Writing this alone is shameful, sinful, and even wrong in the court's eyes, but I shall do as I please. In my world, the Supreme Court of America rules all. They regulate our food and clothing allowance, as well as shelter for each of its citizens. I live in a world where there is no such thing as electricity, automobiles, or even free will, only the will of the court and the toil of one's career. Before hearing the manuscripts left behind, I didn't even know there was a thing called science that could bring technological advancement, or that the stars in the sky were the suns of other solar systems like my own. But he opened my eyes to the truth. In my society, everyone lives underground because the ozone layer has been so heavily depleted by pollution from the evil American government that the surface of the planet is nearly 140 degrees. You only get to eat and sleep if you complete your workload for the day, and if not, you are beaten and maced by the police, and then thrown in a holding cell until you either decide to continue with your workload or be executed. There are no sick days, only execution penalties for failing to complete your daily tasks in order to preserve the colony. There is no time for fun or chatter with others, as speaking without permission is seen to be a crime against the colony. There are no second helpings at dinner, unless of course you are the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and there are absolutely no books or television to keep you entertained during free time. Just study for your career and time to complete your duties. We have no religion. Our only belief is that failure to serve the colony means the collapse of life as we know it. I didn't realize just how horrible my life was until I read the manuscripts left behind. The following are the tales of a great evil, and a world full of citizens too blind to see the truth. Why is it that when the news comes on at night and the biggest story of the day is about a local charity, it gets a 10-minute story, and the next day nobody cares? But when a depressed teenager picks up a gun and decides to kill 10 of his classmates, you'll still see it on the news a week later. Well, I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you it's the same reason you won't be able to stop listening to me. Because if I told you that God would come to you in a dream and tell you to write a book, you'd probably laugh, call me crazy, and I bet that book would never get written. But you won't stop listening when I say that by the time that you finish this book, You will know more about sex, drugs, and violence than an ex-cop who spent the last 20 years of his life in prison. If I told you this book was about a college dropout who spent the last 2 years of his life homeless, jobless, depressed, and suicidal, you'd probably stop listening. But when I tell you by the time you finish this book, you will know more about sex, drugs, and violence, how to handle them in your own life, and just maybe you'll find yourself closer to God, whether you believe in God or not, then I know you can't wait to hear more. What would you say if I asked you to tell your life story? I'm 20 years old and I live on the west side of Columbus, Ohio. I work at FedEx and make $12 an hour loading and unloading trucks. I live with 3 roommates and barely earn enough money to pay rent and food. Although I get by. Well, I bet it would be hard for you to believe that 3 months ago I was homeless, jobless, and quite frankly afraid I would starve and die. It might even be harder for you to imagine what it would be like if every night of your life you had a lucid dream about something going on in your life, and before its end, a woman who called herself God came to you and gave you advice. I bet it would be an even further stretch of the imagination for her to come to you one night and ask you to write a book that will save the world. Well, I bet you'd call me insane if I told you that's exactly why I wrote this. In fact, I bet if God came up to you and offered you the key to eternal happiness, you would doubt God was there. It's hard to believe in something you can't take in through the senses. Take emotion, for example. How can you clearly depict joy, or sorrow, or anger, when they are not logical, but I bet you believe in all 3? Can it be so hard for you to imagine then that it could be possible not only for God to exist, but to come to you in a dream? Is it possible there is a meaning to life bigger than you understand? Neither of those are questions that I can answer for you, but I bet you might be able to answer them for yourself by the time you finish reading this book. For the first 20 years of my life, I felt like every day when I woke up was the new worst day of my life. When I was growing up, my mom worked all day. My dad beat me. The kids at school made fun of me for being a nerd and beat me up too. I was grounded nearly every day, forced to do all the cooking, cleaning, and to top it all off, raise my brother and sister with nearly no help at all. In fact, I'm pretty sure the only reason I didn't shoot myself was because I thought I could run away from all of my problems when I turned 18. Not to mention all the times I grabbed a gun, loaded it, turned the safety off, put the barrel in my mouth, and then pulled the trigger. I bet you wouldn't believe me if I told you the gun never fired. But I suppose the Lord works in mysterious ways. I spent almost all my free time as a child consumed by the joy of the alternate reality of games and books. I always wondered why 100 years ago everyone read books, and today it's hard to find someone with enough motivation to make it past the first page. I always wanted to know why what's on TV affects what people do or say, but most importantly, I just wanted to know why my life sucked for 20 years. I desperately wanted to know why when I was a child no one read books. All the other kids wanted to be professional rappers or athletes, and had no aspirations beyond that of sex, drugs, and violence. I asked myself, why is it that society is constantly promoting this increasingly sedentary and idiotic lifestyle upon us? I asked why it is accepted by society and commonplace for a high school student to do many drugs, smoke cigarettes, get in fights, skip school, have sex with many partners, have children before graduation, drop out, try to become a rock star or celebrity only for fame and fortune, despite constant repercussions continue on this destructive life path, and inevitably end up miserable and blind with no real purpose in life. What would you say if I told you I had the answers to all of those questions? Would you call me insane? Well, by now you might be angry you haven't heard anything about sex or drugs. The violence may not have been what you expected, and you might think this is a waste of your time. So let's start with drugs. What would you say if I asked you to explain the effects of drugs on you? Alcohol and cigarettes are among the leading cause for lung cancer, emphysema, domestic violence, vehicular manslaughter, and drug-related death. Alcohol can cause you to wreck a car, black out and forget the night before, get in fights, make you sick, give you a killer headache, and even kill you. It's sold legally at nearly every gas station, pharmacy, and grocery store in America. I've done nearly every drug known to man. Well, I screwed up. I had a rough childhood and drugs made me think I was happy. But when the drugs ran out, all that was left was anger and shame. Drugs take a grip on your brain and make you feel as though you need them to continue life. I can't tell you what to think about the drugs around you, but I can tell you after I wrote this, I stopped doing them, and without them, I'm higher than ever before. When I was a sophomore in high school, I taught myself how to make crystal meth by reading books. It got me very high, but my heart rate was doubled. I became extremely paranoid all the time. It hurt my grades, my family life, my wallet, could have killed me, and even put holes in my teeth. Coke gave me a rush and made me money for a while, but eventually caused all the same problems. Pills gave me hot flashes. LSD made months at a time simply vanish. Heroin made me incredibly ill the morning after. And marijuana caused me to become very happy, then hungry, then sleepy. But no matter how happy or high I thought drugs made me, all they really did was cause problems. When I quit, the problems started going away. And then I found a high better than any I'd ever known. I was high on life. What would you say to me if I told you that most of, if not all, the drugs around you are developed and distributed by your government for no purpose other than to kill off people, to control the population, keep people stupid so they don't become intelligent enough to see what really happens in the world, and more so than any other reason, to profit for the corrupt government officials producing them? What would you say if I asked you about your opinion on cigarettes? Well, I started smoking cigarettes when I was 8 years old. My grandmother died of lung cancer when I was 12 years old. And despite that, I've smoked cigarettes solidly for 12 years. My smoker's cough is getting worse. I'm only 20 years old. I have a hard time completing any amount of physical labor without partially losing my breath. My sinuses are always clogged. I've lost most of my sense of smell and taste. And I'm fairly certain if I don't quit soon, it will be the death of me. But the gas station keeps selling them to me, and I'm fairly certain they would have to be morally corrupt in big tobacco companies if they cut opiates into them in order to increase addictive properties, as well as growing them in radiation-enriched soil from where we tested nuclear bombs, marketed them out to children, and all the while paid off government officials to keep them legal. What if I told you God said she would help me quit cigarettes when I finished this book? Would you call me insane? Cigarettes are in fact more addictive than heroin, crack, and alcohol combined. Once you start smoking, there's a good chance you'd do so knowing it would kill you. Maybe I was dumb and wrong to accept a cigarette when I was a child, but maybe the adult who gave one to me was a little bit more wrong. If I told you it is wrong to do drugs that are harmful to yourself or those around you because God believes so, you might have your doubts. But if I proved doing drugs of that nature would lead you to ruin your entire life, you just might avoid them. Would it be hard for you to believe that every day around you your government uses television, books, radio, and even your education system to alter your opinion on subjects? Well, I bet you'd find it more difficult to believe it were possible they use drug laws for profit, won't grant unanimous health care because it would lose them money, probably the reason that they're going to make us pay taxes if we don't have health care, and could even go as far as to operate an internal mission to destroy the Twin Towers in order to drive the nation into a war for oil without ever telling the truth to its own citizens. I'm not saying any of those are facts, but I bet it opened your mind. Now let's suppose it was possible that was actually happening. I suppose if it was, that the citizens of that government could fix all of its problems by simply bringing forth a generation of scholars and morally righteous congressmen, with a presidential cabinet with the confidence and motivation to do so. In fact, if that were all true, I don't think it would be too far a stretch of the imagination that world peace is possible. What if I told you the reason no one reads books in today's society is that the government's control on the media has caused people that show higher levels of intellect and interest in literature to be ridiculed by their peers, lose self-esteem, and eventually just merge with the rest of the idiocracy around them, developed by the government to prevent their citizens' ability to revolt against them and eventually turn them all into servants? If I said that, you just might think I was insane. and you would probably find me to be deeper into the depths of insanity if I told you they are currently working on a plan to use television to brainwash you and attain world power with subliminal messaging, such as making fun of the most intelligent characters in all of their television shows, like calling Lisa and Milhouse from The Simpsons nerds. Now, I can't say either of those are proven facts, but I bet it stretched your imagination. What would you say if I told you the government advocates stealing in order to increase the prison population and profits from the fines given to those who steal? Well, maybe you would believe it if you thought for a second and asked yourself why in the world there is a series of Kentucky Fried Chicken commercials on television that all advocate stealing. In one of them, the father asks his son to play hide and seek, and then the son runs out of the room, and the father steals all his chicken. There's another one where there's a bowl of chicken sitting between a father and a daughter, and the father pretends to receive a phone call from the daughter's boyfriend so that she'll leave the room and go answer it. When she leaves, he steals all her chicken. If I told you that stealing is wrong because God believes so, you would have room for disbelief. But if I told you that stealing from others will only give you a horrid karma, causing you to be stolen from, just like the Bible states, maybe you'd think twice before you took that $5 bill off the table while no one is looking. Well, clearly you've listened to me for this long, searching for answers, and all you've gotten were ridiculous questions. So I want you to just open your mind for a moment and envision what life would be like if your house was given to you. So was your job. Any insurance you needed was covered by your tax money. Your nation's economy was booming, and everyone around you was happy and at peace with each other. Now imagine this book made that possible. Well, you just might say that that had to be the biggest load of crap that you've ever heard. If I told you the secret to life, success, and happiness is as simple as being morally righteous, you might call me a whack job. But I bet if I told you that porn could make you a millionaire, you just might go out and start filming. Do you know why that is? Well, what if I told you it's because all of society simply lacks the same intelligence level they had 50 years ago? What if I said that technology advances and society regresses on a daily basis? Well, what would you say if I told you people are simply ill-informed? They look for answers in all the wrong places. And that's probably why you're still listening to me. If I told you that reading books will make you happier, more intelligent, and better able to handle everyday life, you just might go pick up a book. But if I told you that reading books would turn you into an ugly nerd with no friends, then I can understand why you might avoid them. I bet you would gape in disbelief if I told you that's exactly what your government has done with your education system. In fact, if I told you that without books and freedom of thought, that in 50 years your entire nation would become idiots incapable of intelligent thought beyond the need for food, water, and sex, you just might call me a crackpot. But if I said the only reason marijuana is illegal is because a man named William Randolph Hearst wrote poorly of it in books and newspapers in order to illegalize it for fear that it could destroy his textile and paper industries for its superior usages as rope, denim, and paper, well, I bet you could probably find a book with facts backing that. If I told you the only reason the government won't issue unanimous health care is that it would hinder their ability to profit by denying insurance to the only people who actually need it, you just might say I had problems. However, if that were true and I told you the only thing needed to fix it was a nation of people willing to reform it through a $10 monthly tax on your paycheck that would not be imposed on the unemployed, although they would still be eligible for health care, maybe then you just might believe me. Let me paint a mental image for you. Every night you go to sleep and have a dream pertaining to something going on in your life. And at the end of that dream, a woman who refers to herself as God gives you advice. This goes on for about 12 years, until one night she says, "You're going to write a book that will forever bring happiness to you and those around you. I have for you here the first page and the last, but nothing in between. In this book you will use the deepest, darkest secrets of your life to make a great truth known. If you do this, you will have happiness and freedom. But if you don't, you shall be doomed to an eternity in hell. Then you went on to argue with her about writing it, and when the dream ended, she handed you the first page and the last, but would say no more. When you awoke from the ludicrous dream, you could still read those pages in your mind. Well, if that actually happened to you, I bet not only might you question God's reality, but you just might write that book. What if I asked about your impression of violence in your life? When I was a kid, my biological father would beat my mother, and then me. He chain smoked, drank excessively, and used more drugs than I can count. I used to ask myself why he did it every day, until recently. He took all his anger and depression out on his own wife and his son, rather than realizing that hard work could have solved all of his problems. He couldn't hold a job, his wife wanted a divorce, and his own son secretly hated him. Although he could have easily changed all of it by quitting drugs, finding a job, being a more caring husband, and paying attention to his son more than the occasional beating. For 20 years I blamed myself for his actions. And if I told you it didn't change how I think, I'd definitely be lying. I bet you could learn something from this if I told you his wife left him. I haven't spoken to him in over 9 years, and he probably still can't find a job. Would it be hard for you to believe that your government uses the media to advocate violence to children and ultimately fill the prison system with their own slaves? And they use video games like Grand Theft Auto to do it. I bet you believe that before you believe that being morally righteous is the road to true happiness. This subject has always been a difficult one for me. I would get into fights with kids at school who enjoyed picking on me, and I got beat up on a daily basis. Once again, the faults of others taken out on me. Would you believe me if I told you the only reason kids picked on each other in school was because the corrupt government had used the media to subconsciously tell children to pick on nerds? What if I say they advocate this with video games, the radio, and television? And that's why Nelson always picks on Bart and the other children when you watch The Simpsons. And we hear songs on the radio every day with a chorus that goes like this. All you other kids with your pumped up kicks, you better run, outrun my bullet. Well, given my situation, you might understand why I grew to love books, where anything was possible, and all of your questions could be answered by turning the page. What would you think if I told you I picked up some books on Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu and never got beat up again? If I told you that for 20 years, every time I went to work, my boss yelled at me in anger all day long until one day I went in, and an hour into my shift, my boss said he liked me and let me leave early. Then went on to tell you that every time someone knocked on my door to talk about bills, they asked me for money. Until one day, a man showed up to my door to save me money on bills. And when I wake up every morning, I feel like it's the new best day of my life. You might not believe me. What if I said God told me that the only reason my life sucked for 20 years was because I denied God faith? What would you say if I told you I accepted God 3 months ago, and that's the only reason my life is so darn good right now? If I told you violence is unjust because God believes so, you might say I'm losing touch with reality. But if I told you that your nation is currently lodged in a war for no more than oil, proved it to you, and then told you it could be fixed by electing a new military staff, you just might take action. Why don't you take a look at Cheney's ideas for the pipelines across Afghanistan? Maybe that's what's really going on. If I told you that to this day we don't know what Gulf syndrome is, but it may have very well been caused by experimental serums injected into our soldiers by the government in hopes that it would make super soldiers in the days to come, you just might think I was crazy. Have you ever wondered why China and most other countries are so far ahead of us in education? In fact, I think roughly American students rank 25th in math, the most important subject there is, 17th in science, and 14th in reading. Well, if I said it's because our education system is used to scare you from reading books, and other countries promote books, you might not listen. So let me give you some facts. In public schools in America, or at least at my school, you were forced to read books that were assigned to you. In many other countries, you are given a large list of books to select one from that interests you. Now, in my opinion, no one likes things they are forced to do, but no one has a problem with freedom of choice. What if I asked about your outlook on education? A week before my 18th birthday, my stepfather told me, if you want to leave, the door will be open. Well, I listened, and on my birthday I moved in with my cousin. I soon found out how hard it was to be an adult. I had to pay rent, buy food, and go to work no matter how sick I was. Soon enough, I was running out of money and cutting class in high school to go to work. This hurt my grades. I barely graduated, and I lost my opportunity at scholarships, despite being in AP classes. I went to college at a place called Fairmont State to study mechanical engineering. I wasn't ready for it. A week into school, I discovered how easy it was to meet new people and party. This was pretty new to me since I had spent my entire life in my parents' basement and rarely elsewhere. Well, I partied too much, cut too much class, and lost my opportunity to fulfill my dream. I tried going back, but it turns out that until you pay off your standing college loans, you can't go to any school in the nation, no matter what your GPA is, unless you qualify for financial aid. In fact, it turns out you can't qualify for financial aid until age 25, unless your parents have a minimum income amount. And that if you don't come up with the money yourself, believe it or not, there's no way to finish school until you pay off your loans or turn roughly 23 to 25, depending on what state you live in. Or get your own place and file for emancipation from your parents so you can qualify for financial aid. When I was in the 4th grade, my history class was studying the French and Indian War. My book told me that America sided with the Indians to help prevent the French from taking their land. But the books in the library, in the non-fiction section, told me that the Americans gave a peace offering over dinner to the Indians. This peace offering was several blankets, laced with smallpox, given out specifically to kill off the Indians and take their land. And I can guarantee you can find a book that says that. In fact, I'm fairly certain that's the real story of why we celebrate Thanksgiving. Thanks for the land and the food, we're giving you smallpox. Libraries are one of the few socialistic deployments our country still holds on to, and in my opinion, they are currently the only place on earth with the answers to the most important questions in life. It really drains my hope for our nation knowing that they are funded by taxes and just might all be demolished for their inability to profit, because I seriously believe we live in a world where money makes it go round. If the libraries are all gone, the only place left to learn will be government-regulated schools, websites, and the worst of them all, television. In my opinion, that would be how a bunch of corrupt politicians could brainwash an entire nation to become slaves, used to attain world power. Quite simply, the quintessence of propaganda itself. Would you believe me if I told you this happens all the time? And that's why you remember the famous duel between Alexander Hamilton and James Madison? But I bet not a darn one of you, unless you've researched it yourself, remembers what that duel was over. The foundation of the World Bank. Which seriously distraughts me. If I told you educating yourself is necessary because God believes so, you might doubt me. But if I told you a good education is the only way to achieve all your dreams, you might give it some thought. I bet if I told you that by accepting God you no longer needed school, or to read government-regulated books to make your dreams come true, you might say I had psychological problems. And if I told you that the government could make school free to the entire population through taxes, but refuses to because it would lose them money, and ultimately allow their citizens to become intelligent enough to fix the government or overthrow it, well, then you just might say I was borderline psychopathic. If I told you that education wasn't part of the key to success, I'd be lying. But if I told you that you don't need government-regulated school, but can attain an education simply by reading non-government regulated books that you could find at, I don't know, the library, I don't think I'd be stretching the truth too far. If I told you your government uses the education system to brainwash children, you might call me a quack. But I bet if I proved it, you just might have your children schooled privately. What if I asked you about your impression of family in your life? When I was growing up, I never had a very good impression of family in my life. For nearly my entire life, the father figure in my house was both physically and mentally abusive towards me. My mother watched this go on for years and never did anything to stop it. I fell out of touch with them, and soon enough, couldn't even speak to them. If I told you I still hate them and don't speak to them, I'd definitely be a liar. And I bet if I told you I'm closer to them now than ever, simply because I accepted God, well, you might say I was delusional. Now, if I said that I honestly believe that I have a better relationship with my stepfather, because when he heard this, he realized I knew he was a good man and that I had forgiven him, you might think I was dreaming. It would be my guess that 75% of children in today's society probably receive the majority of their education through television. Most parents either don't have the time or are simply lacking the motivation to educate their children, and quite often use television simply to entertain the children, to distract them so that they can do whatever it is that is their own personal bidding. I, however, was not one of those children. And if I told you that because of that, I will prosper in life and grow closer to my family and friends, you'd probably be skeptical. But if I told you that when my stepfather heard this book, he apologized to me and grew closer to my mother as well as myself, you might say I was high. Why don't you go ask him? Because he did. Why is it that the news is riddled with violence? The radio has songs about killing people playing on it. Television is full of shows like Cops and UFC fights, which are riddled with violence. And video games get more violent each year, with more and more ridiculous releases, and the continuation of Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty, which have no real goal other than to kill everyone in the game. Maybe you enjoy your killing games, but do you really think it's necessary that we put that on television and that we expose our children to a world that advocates violence to that level? If I told you that the reason domestic violence is more prevalent today than 50 years ago is because of what people watch on television every day, which includes your video games, I'm sure you'd have room for disbelief. But if I could prove that were true, I bet you may attempt to fix it by filtering what your children watch. If I told you that respecting your family is necessary because God believes so, you'd probably have room for doubts. But if I could prove that doing so would bring you happiness in life, you just might try and work all your family problems out. If I told you the reason my mother ignored the problems right in front of her every day was because she felt confronting them would have ruined her family life, would you understand why she did it? Well, I bet there's no way you would believe that by hearing this book, she realized that I love and forgave her. And then she forgave herself too. Well, if I told you that God came to me in a dream and told me that would happen, you might say I was a lunatic. But I bet if I proved it, your brain might melt. Why don't you ask my mother? What if I asked you about your friends? I've had many different friends in life, some of which grew closer to me, and others whom have drifted farther away. As life went on, it became apparent to me that it was senseless to lose a good friend over something as meaningless as spilled milk. Well, I bet if I told you that when the same friends finished reading this book, we became closer than ever, you might ask me where I get my drugs at. What if I asked you about your views on personal wellness? When I was a student in high school, I was an underweight, acne-ridden, out-of-shape loser with messed up teeth to top it off. Well, time goes on and things change. If I told you that taking care of yourself is necessary because God believes so, you might say I was unstable. But if I told you that by reading books on personal wellness and taking affirmative action rather than being lazy, that I have attained the body of a UFC fighter, my acne started clearing up, I became more intelligent, and my teeth are straighter and whiter than ever. Well, maybe you'd believe that. What if I told you I didn't believe it when I wrote this, but it was promised by God? You might doubt that. I bet you won't doubt it when you see my pearly white teeth and my 8-pack. If I told you that your government uses the media to sway your perception of reality and ultimately turn you into an out-of-shape weakling with no intellect so you can never revolt against them, you might tell me I was off my rocker. But if you knew that to be true, and I said it could be fixed by bringing forth a generation of intelligent athletes, well, you might lean towards believing me. For the last 50 years, the obesity rate in today's society has nearly tripled, and the intelligence level of athletes has constantly dwindled. If I told you that on television 50 years ago the programs depicted a strong image of righteousness and morality, and that today's programs embrace a loss of confidence, self-esteem, honesty, integrity, and sexual prowess, would it change how you think? What if I said that's exactly why most athletes are less intelligent today? If I told you there are natural cures for cancer, and we instead give treatments and pills that do no more than treat side effects so the patient sees it fit to continually dish out the money to receive more chemo and pills, you might be offended. You may even find yourself more offended if I went on to tell you that the tobacco industry is in Congress's pocket, as well as alcohol, and you can't forget all of the alienated organizations operating the drug ring. Then it just might offend you to the point of upheaval if I told you that these organizations had put their hands so deep in Congress's pocket that they literally controlled its every move with no more than money, causing alcohol and tobacco to remain legal continually, damaging and stupefying the populace, as well as benefiting from the citizens' ignorance when they go to the doctor and find out they have cancer. If I told you that all fast food has steroids or estrogen injected into it by the FDA in order to give women larger breasts to increase the slave population by promoting sex to make men larger so they will make better soldiers in war, you might not concur. But if I proved it, you might stop going to McDonald's anymore and eat organically instead to protect your body from the pesticides, preservatives, steroids, and general toxins in all FDA-approved food. Why don't you go look up something called the Monsanto Protection Act that Obama signed? Well, at least that's what I believe. In fact, I believe there is a chemical called hydrogen cyanide that is emitted from the pesticide and common weed killer Roundup. And that same chemical is the active catalyst in Zyklon B, which was used to kill the Jews in World War II. I've gone to many gyms before, and the same thing seems to be true of almost all of them. There are less people at them each year. We live in a society where laziness is promoted via television and the internet. In fact, about the only people that I ever see at the gym are ones whose career mandates that they stay in shape. In my opinion, soon enough all the gyms will close down for their inability to make enough profit to stay open. And the only place left to work out will be gyms that are open to people who need to work out for their profession. Well, I'd imagine if a bunch of government officials wanted to turn you into an out of shape weakling unless you were a soldier or a worker for them, they would simply promote video games, television, pornography, cell phones, and an acceptance for being out of shape and avoiding strenuous physical activity. And they do so with subliminal messaging in television shows like The Big Bang Theory, where the out of shape nerd gets to be with a very physically attractive woman despite his lack of motivation to ever get in better shape. What if I asked you if you believe in God? Every day I work on bettering myself. For the last 3 months, I've become smarter, stronger, faster, and even better looking. If I told you the only reason that was possible was because I embraced God, you'd still have room for questions. But if I told you that you can do the same through diet and exercise, it might get you to take action. If I said the only reason my life sucked for 20 years was that I denied God and myself, and God helps those who help themselves, you'd still have room for questions. But if I said I turned my entire life around through hard work, you just might do the same. What if I asked you about your views on sex? When I was 7 years old, my biological father raped me. He raped my mother first, and then doused her in holy water, attempting to perform an exorcism on her because she had asked for a divorce, as I watched this quietly through the crack of the door. If I told you I was still a virgin at 20 years old because I believed sex should only be shared by two people who were in love, what would you say? Well, if I told you I lied to everyone around me about it my entire life because I was told subconsciously by the government that a man's worth was judged by the number of women he sleeps with, would you judge me? If I told you it is necessary to share sex only with your true love because God believes so, you might laugh. But if I told you not only would it make you happier, but allow you to have more satisfying, longer lasting sex, you might exercise the thought. Recently, sex has become one of the hottest topics in today's society. We watch porn on the computer, buy it at the store, make sexual jokes in the workplace and at school. Even little kids do that. Even when the M&M's commercial on TV comes on, it has the red M&M singing "I'm sexy and I know it" when he believes the brown M&M was naked. If I told you it was because the government is using sublingual messaging to increase its slave population, you might just call me a quack. But I bet if I proved that were true, and I told you it could be fixed by promoting love rather than sex, you might do something about it. I bet if I told you I have found the love of my life and am still uncertain, you'd understand why. If I told you I am ready to get married to the woman of my dreams because we have a lot in common, she's brilliant, funny, sexy, more down to earth and sweeter than any girl I've ever met, you just might believe that. If I told you when I wrote this book, I didn't believe it myself, but when she heard it, she fell in love with me too, you might say I was mentally challenged. Well, what if I told you your government uses your tax money through programs like Social Security and HUD to keep jobless parents alive only to increase their slave population? Now, if that were true, I bet it could be fixed by creating a school system that guaranteed jobs so that we didn't have homeless parents, so that we didn't have parents living off of our taxes. Imagine if this was going on all over the earth. Now, what would you say if I told you the government uses the internet to advocate pornography, to cause its citizens to be more interested in sex rather than love, to increase the population, because they feel it's much easier to brainwash a newborn child with the media than it is to alter the opinion of an adult, and that's the same reason that porn site pop-ups come up when you're browsing the internet on regular websites. How does a president with an IQ of less than 100 get elected twice? Well, I'm not giving any names, but How does someone who can't read or write his own speeches get reelected? How could that same man possibly pass the Patriot Act? What would you say if I told you that same act included the ability to quarter soldiers in your home against your will, as well as your permission to be tracked via cell phone or GPS with our satellite system, and completely annihilates several parts of your First Amendment rights? Well, you'd probably laugh hysterically at how crazy you thought I was. But if I said they have buildings in the CIA with 35 to 40,000 people monitoring these satellite systems at any time, how would it make you feel? Yeah, George Orwell was wrong. Big Brother's not watching you. What would you say if I told you that corporations control the world? Well, what would you say if I told you they do it by paying off Congress and making their own laws for continuation of their business? And the tobacco and alcohol industries are the biggest contributors. 11111. Well, on CNN today I saw a stealth bomber built by China, I'm guessing about 15 years ago, that is completely undetectable to both radar and satellite systems and can sink a carrier from 1,850 miles away while traveling at 4 times the speed of an F-16. I wonder what they have that we don't know about. To think nearly everything we own is made in China. And China backs North Korea, and Russia backs them. Well, I bet that means we owe them something like $17.5 trillion. Boy, would I be mad at America if I lived in China, slaving in those sweatshops all day to produce products that Americans make imaginary money from the banks appear and purchase and build up debt that they never have really intent of paying off. Well, if they were really angry at us, I bet we could work things out if we stabilized our economy through socialism, which is, in my opinion, the closest idea possible to a true democracy. And then paid off our debt to China over time with tax money, made off America supporting its own economy and the free market rather than foreign imports and outsourcing workforces to other countries, allowing both countries to prosper. Not only our own economy supporting itself, but China prospering from us paying off the debt, and eventually allowing us to restabilize and bring foreign trade back in with a healthy and stable economy that doesn't require us to build debt to do so. Well, maybe you're still afraid socialism will make America more like communist Russia. Now, in my opinion, if that's true, it's because of the commercials on television aired during the Cold War. Or maybe the posters you saw posted up on telephone poles or at the grocery store. Yeah, you're right. Americans don't get brainwashed by their own government. If I told you that when a commercial comes on asking for money to help starving children in Africa, the money is really used to make the corporate executives advertising that commercial rich, how would it make you feel? It takes money just to get a commercial on television. If I said these commercials are full of lies, and though there are people starving in Africa, they are just as technologically advanced as us, and do not actually live in village huts, but houses, well, you might say I'm full of myself. But if I said that only 10% of the money sent to these commercials is actually used to feed third world countries, then I proved it, well, then you just might ignore those commercials. Next time one of them comes on and you're thinking about donating money, why don't you ask for a brochure, or ask them how much of the money actually gets donated to starving children in Africa? Because I'm betting that it's a lot less of a percentage than what you believe. There are starving people all over our nation, and we send money to Africa. Stop it. Stop feeding lies and support your own hungry. Send money to the soup kitchen down the street. Feed the homeless yourself. Give $1 to the guy standing on the side of the road hungry. I've been that guy. Feed that guy, not a corporate executive. If I said all of our elections are rigged and the citizens' votes mean nothing, you'd probably say I'm mentally ill. If I said that we only have a black president to make the black population happy, he only ran against Hillary Clinton to please the female population, and all of our elections are predetermined in advance, would you call me a liar? In fact, in my opinion, if no one at all showed up to vote on election day, the news would still say we did and give you a fake poll, because I believe politics are predetermined to keep the rich rich and the poor poor. And that's probably the same reason that we have a man who worked on the technology used for the voting system that is currently coming forward to declare that he believes that it is more than possible that the election could have been rigged. If I told you our economic deficit is so high because our tax money is put into the pockets of corporate America as well as funding a war for oil, you might get offended. If I said banks really use your money in the stock market and have no intent of paying it back if lost, you might tell me I'm lying. But how would you feel if I told you the Great Depression was caused by a stock market crash? And back then, the money was supposed to be backed by gold and the Federal Reserve. What would you say if I told you all of this could be proven if you simply researched something referred to as the Jekyll Island meetings, where the World Bank was founded and the Federal Reserve was destroyed? No taxation without representation. Those words founded our nation, and supposedly its democratic ideals too. England was taxing our colonies unjustifiably, and a brilliant group of men founded an underground society and wrote books and newspapers to save their dying colonies. We were greatly outnumbered and far inferior nautically, but our cause was just, and we overthrew England. Today we justify our founding fathers' hatred of tax with the 16th Amendment. Well, I bet you would doubt me if I told you your Social Security number is designed to replace your name once you've been brainwashed to become a tax-paying slave. Now, I don't think something like that could happen overnight, but if it were true, I'd imagine the freethinkers like myself and the men who founded our nation will soon be far and few between. If I said the reason that when you go online to check the balance of your bank account and it's 24 hours behind is just to get you to overdraft, you'd probably doubt me. But if I proved it, you might stop using banks. If I said there's a place called Guantanamo Bay where people like myself who know the truth are sent to be tortured, you might have doubts. But if I told you that's where Saddam Hussein was sent to be executed, and our government's prisoners of war are treated just as badly as any other countries, well, maybe you'd listen then. Now, if I said issues like gay marriage and abortion are only used to distract you from the real issues, you might tell me to shut up. But if I proved it, you might turn off the television and get up off your rump to help fix your government. What if I said there's a Starbucks on nearly every corner? Walmart outsources its workforce to China. McDonald's is doing no more than contributing to an obesity epidemic. Microsoft intentionally designs products to fail after their expiration of their warranty. Video game console providers are bent on corrupting everyone to violence. Television is trying to make you more open to sex, as well as the internet. Every media outlet around you is feeding you lies. Corporations are taking over the world, and you're too blind to see the truth. You have no real rights. They have all been repealed by the National Defense Authorization Act by Obama on New Year's Eve, as well as Bush's Patriot Act, and various other laws. Your country is on the cusp of civil war or dictatorship. If you don't band together now, there may be no hope. Well, what sort of ideas would it give you if I had said that? What if I told you that all you and I needed to do to fix our government didn't require you to kill or do anything outrageous beyond banding together with your countrymen in a peaceful protest for change that we are given the right to form with the First Amendment that we should never let go of, and it would require us to do nothing illegal. Maybe passing this book around and making sure that people hear it could start those protests for change. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. The Constitution of the United States of America states there is to be a separation of church and state. Yet all of our money has the words, "In God we trust," printed on the back of it. And every day, when we say the Pledge of Allegiance, we say one nation under God. Do you find that odd? In my opinion, there are some very good churches that actually help the needy as well as their parishioners. Well, I was raised in a Catholic home until I was 18, and I very deeply believe my own religion is partially or entirely a lie. I believe the rest of the churches collect money to be sent to the main branch of their church, which uses it through people like the Pope to help attain world power and keep the real message of Christ forever hidden. And they do so by giving false hope to the deaf and blind children, saying they can be healed and saved by God's great power for cash, and blackmailing his pedophile priests, making sure they are collecting money so that he will provide them protection. Why is wine the blood of Christ? Alcohol is the most prominent drug in our society and causes more problems than any other inanimate object that has been recorded in the time on the face of this planet. But there are people who bring their entire families to church and believe that this is the blood of Christ. Wine seems more like the blood of the Antichrist to me. What if I told you that in order to enact in a Kabbalistic satanic ritual, you consumed the flesh and blood of man, and that an act called transubstantiation is what converts communion into the flesh and blood of man? What if Christianity is really only partially correct, or even entirely false? What if your government forces this religion on you slowly without you ever realizing this, and they do it with things like your currency and getting you to say the Pledge of Allegiance in school, stating one nation under God with liberty and justice for all? And what it should be is one nation brought closer to slavery with more slavery and facade for all. Have you ever wondered why your economy is falling apart? The unemployment rate is skyrocketing, and the number of homeless men, women, and children is at an all-time high. What would you say if I told you it was because your government and church are one entity that is the absolute embodiment of evil? I'd imagine you might call me insane. But what if I told you 350 million citizens can't lose against 200,000 government officials? At 20 years old, I was homeless, jobless, sexless, loveless, godless, hopeless, and lost. In my opinion, it's because the government has lied to all of us our entire lives in order to control us through the media. What if I said most of, if not all, the questions in this book are really answers and not questions? What if I told you that the books all around you could have unveiled it to you all along? Well, if I said that, I would be accused of treason and executed. Because if I told you I am the Son of God, and so are you, I just might get crucified. If I said that church and government are one entity, and the real message of Jesus Christ has been lost, you might still tell me that I have problems. But if it became possible for you to think for yourself, you just might believe me. If I said the church people believe they worship God at every day really uses their money to deceive them and alter their perception of reality, you might tell me to screw off. But if I proved it, I bet the new definition of church could be world peace. The world could speak one language with no curse words, and religion may never be forced on anyone again. Then you might believe me. If I told you had I never written this, and if you can't understand it, the world will end in nuclear holocaust, you might tell me I am living in an alternate reality. But if I proved it, my alternate reality just might become real. The entirety of this book up to now has been filled with what-ifs that I can't answer for you, but what I'm about to tell you is a fact. 3 months ago ended a life of nightmares for me, in which I was a new person every night, and they all ended in disaster, followed by advice from a woman who told me she was God, and for the last 3 months, she only explains things to me in dreams. In my honest opinion, God speaks through me, and denying God's existence, no matter what you envision God to be, will doom you to eternal darkness and unhappiness. I honestly believe most men and women's lives are driven by sex, and that by achieving love before sex, you can help attain world peace, find your soulmate, and live happily ever after. I claim not that I am any greater man than another, nor that I am any more divine than another. As is stated in our Constitution, all men are created equal and entitled to certain unalienable rights, or God-given rights if you will, and a dream is but an aspiration, be it one of consciousness, a daydream, one of subconscious, a dream while you're asleep, or even just a goal you wish to attain. So unto those who aspire to the same dream as I, may God be with us. What if I told you that God was modeled after my own conscience this whole time, and that the ability to do good or evil is within the confines of all men, needing but only the permission of the beholder to emit itself from an individual? What if I told you that it doesn't matter what your image of God is, just as long as you have faith in something? What if we as people are too naive to understand whether God is a he, a she, or even an it? How are you supposed to understand something that you've never met? How are you supposed to understand an entity in which you've never contacted that doesn't contact you? Especially when you live in a world that, I mean, let's face it, there's famine and war going on all around us. It's kind of hard for some people to accept God, and I understand exactly why. But what if our naivety is the same reason that God is angry when we worship graven idols? I believe God is a woman, because in my opinion, women give life and men take it away. I also believe in Jesus Christ. I honestly believe it's quite possible the man died for our sins, whether he be the Messiah or not. But what if I said it doesn't matter if you pray to Buddha, or Allah, or Jesus, just as long as you know that there is a higher power that we can agree we are too naive to understand, and need not worship material items. or other human beings. Well, maybe then all the holy wars would end. I spent nearly my entire life consumed in a world of lies that I brought upon myself, and there was always a new lie to cover up. I lied about things I've done to make myself more ruthless to others, to keep them scared of fighting me. I lied about how good I was at sports to make others think more highly of me. I lied about how many women I slept with to make others believe I was more of a man. I've lied about the loss of friends and family to cover up the real reasons I'm sad and depressed and angry with the world, so that everyone around me feels pity for me and doesn't criticize me for my depression. In fact, I lie so much that sometimes I can't even really control it anymore. I've become a compulsive liar. I'm trying to fix it. If I told you that it is necessary to confess your sins to others because God believes so, you probably wouldn't listen. If I said that I stole money from my employers and family members to feed drug addictions, I tormented my kid brother his entire life to vent my own frustrations. I tortured and killed small animals as a child. I've started fights with no justifiable reason. I've had sex without being in love. And I believe that the U.S. government forced me to. Well, you might ask why the hell I just told you that. But if I said that saying that just might free you from hell, and that it was a greater freedom than any confession box could ever give you, you also might believe I was a liar. But I'd definitely be lying if I didn't tell you that since I confessed my sins and lies, I feel better about all of it in myself now more than ever. I feel like I've been set free by the truth, and I don't have to worry about my world of lies anymore. By now you pretty much know the story of my entire life, so let me put it into perspective for you. For 20 years I lived in hell. Then one night, I prayed to God, because I believed the woman in my dreams just needed me to believe in her. And the next day when I woke up, the craziest things you could ever believe actually started happening to me. And a book that I believe God wrote through me made all my dreams come true. Before I had read these manuscripts, I didn't know what freedom was. I had no idea how to learn and become more intelligent in any aspect of life, other than the toil of my career. After reading them, I cut the chip out of my hand, beat up 6 cops, stole a surface-dwelling suit, escaped from the underground government complex, and I found a library on the surface world. Then inside it, I found all kinds of books that only showed me even more so that everything I had heard was true. Then I came across a book that showed me how to make tanks and guns. There was a book that showed me how to grow and tend crops, one that showed me how to treat and cure disease, one that taught me of the natural ecosystem of our planet and how to repair it, and even a book called the Bible that taught me of God and moral values. I built a tank, then returned to the complex and freed all of my comrades. We then used some books from the library to figure out how to rebuild the ozone layer using gold dust, and the spaceships from a facility called NASA. Now we live in a community full of freedom and fairness, fresh air and real food, and everyone is happy and at peace with each other. Now I always rest on Sunday and keep it holy, and I am so happy with my Lord that I never use the Lord's name in vain. For my entire life, I was fed nothing but lies, until one day I was nudged towards the truth, and it is the truth, and only the truth, that can set you free. So I never lie. I believed in myself and in God, and it has brought me a happiness greater than any I have ever known. So, if I told you God said, life is like a book, so pick up a God-blessed pen and write, well, would you believe me?